I wasn't looking for a conspiracy when I started mapping the chronology of Rome's kings. I was simply trying to understand the transition from monarchy to republic. Reading Livy, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, cross-referencing with archaeological evidence, standard historical research. Nothing unusual. But then I realized something that made me stop completely. Rome, the city that conquered the known world, that built its entire identity on being a free republic, was ruled by 3 consecutive kings who weren't Roman, they were Etruscan. And here's what disturbed me. When you add up the time these 3 kings ruled, it comes to almost 100 years, an entire century. 3 Etruscan kings, 100 years of rule, complete transformation from a village into a monumental city, and then simply expelled. And Rome, somehow, keeps everything they built, the infrastructure, the institutions, the political system, the religion, but completely erases who actually created all of it. That's not how conquests work. That's not how occupations end. When you expel foreign invaders, you don't carefully preserve their power structures. You don't keep their buildings as civic monuments. You don't continue using exactly the same religious system they implemented, unless they weren't invaders, unless the expulsion never really happened the way we've been told, unless the entire narrative of Rome's Republican foundation is a cover story for something much more complex and much more disturbing. Because the more I investigated the 3 Etruscan kings, the less the official explanation made sense. And the more I realized that Rome didn't expel the Etruscans. Rome was Etruscan and spent the next 500 years trying to erase that truth. Let me show you what they don't want you to see. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus ruled Rome from 616 to 579 BC. Ancient sources admit he was Etruscan, son of a Greek refugee who settled in Tarquinia, married to Tanaquil, a powerful Etruscan noblewoman. And here's the part the official history can never adequately explain. He didn't conquer Rome. He was chosen as king. Livy writes that after the death of King Ancus Marcius, Tarquin simply took over. The Roman people chose him. But why? Why would Romans choose an Etruscan as their leader? The official answer is vague. He was wealthy, influential, charismatic. But consider what Tarquin actually did when he came to power. He doubled the size of the Senate, from 100 to 200 members. And here's the crucial detail the sources mention casually. These new senators were called patres minorum gentium, fathers of the lesser houses. They weren't traditional Roman aristocrats. They were new men, outsiders. He began building the Cloaca Maxima, the largest sewer system in the ancient world, an engineering project so advanced it still functions today, 2,600 years later. The construction techniques? Etruscan. The design? Etruscan. The specialized workforce? Etruscan. He built the Circus Maximus, not a simple arena, but a massive entertainment complex. And he introduced the Roman games, which were, in fact, Etruscan religious games transplanted to Rome. He reorganized the entire Roman military structure following the Etruscan model. The centuries, the legions, the very organization of the Roman army, all implemented by Tarquin. Now, here's the question nobody asks. How did an Etruscan refugee have resources for for infrastructure projects of this scale? How did he have access to engineers specialized in construction techniques Rome supposedly didn't know? How did he have authority to completely reorganize Roman military and political institutions? The official answer: he was very talented, and Rome was open to new ideas. But this explanation becomes impossible to maintain when you realize this wasn't gradual cultural influence. It was systematic and coordinated transformation. And here's what disturbs me most. Tarquin didn't rule alone for a few decades. He established a dynasty. When he was assassinated in 579 BC, his son-in-law, another Etruscan, immediately assumed power. There was no vote, no Senate consultation, no documented resistance whatsoever. One Etruscan died, another Etruscan took over, as if it were planned, as if Rome was already part of something larger. Servius Tullius, Rome's sixth king, ruled from 578 to 535 BC. And this is where the official story starts to completely fall apart. Roman sources tell a nice story. Servius was the son of a Latin slave captured in war, grew up in Tarquinius Priscus's palace, showed great ability, married the king's daughter, and eventually inherited the throne. A classic rags to riches story. But there's a problem. Etruscan sources tell a completely different story. In the Francois tomb at Volci, a monumental Etruscan tomb dating to the 4th century BC, there's a wall painting showing battle scenes. And in one of these scenes, there's a warrior identified by a clear Etruscan inscription: Macstrna. There's no doubt about the identity. The inscription is there. The name is preserved. And the Roman Emperor Claudius, writing in the 1st century AD, explicitly states in a preserved speech, the Lion Tablet, that Servius Tullius was actually this Etruscan warrior called Macstrna. So, who was Servius Tullius, really? A Latin slave who miraculously became king? Or an Etruscan warlord named Macstrna who took power in Rome? Roman sources erased his true identity, but they couldn't erase what he built. And what he built wasn't the work of a former slave, it was the work of someone implementing a long-term plan. The Servian walls. Massive fortifications around Rome, 11 kilometers long, built with blocks of volcanic tuff weighing up to a ton each. The engineering? Etruscan. The techniques? Etruscan. But officially called Servian to give credit to a supposed Roman king. The Centuriate Constitution. Servius reorganized all of Roman society into classes based on wealth and military capability. 5 classes, 193 centuries. This system, identical to the model used in Etruscan cities, not similar, identical. The first Roman census. Servius conducted Rome's first official census, recording 80,000 citizens. But here's the disturbing detail. The Roman census used the same categories, the same divisions, the same religious rituals as Etruscan censuses, as if Rome was being integrated into an already existing administrative system. The Temple of Diana on the Aventine Hill. Servius built this temple as the center of a Latin league under Roman leadership. But the temple design, the rituals, the very concept of a League of Cities, all copied from the Etruscan model of the League of 12 Cities. Now consider this. Servius Tullius expanded Rome's territory to double its size. He completely reorganized its social structure. He established its fundamental political institutions. He built its fortifications. He created its military system. And then, according to official history, his son-in-law, Tarquinius Superbus, another Etruscan, murdered him and took the throne. And nobody resisted, no revolt, no civil war, no attempt to restore the legitimate lineage. Why? Because there was no legitimate Roman lineage. There were only different Etruscan factions competing for control of Rome. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus Tarquin the Proud, Rome's last king. Ruled from 535 to 509 BC. Roman sources portray him as a monstrous tyrant, arrogant, cruel, brutal, ruling through terror. But even these hostile sources can't deny what he built. The Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, Rome's most important religious structure, started by Tarquinius Priscus, completed by Tarquinius Superbus. A massive temple with 3 cellars, following exactly the design of Etruscan 3-chamber temples. And here's the detail that reveals everything. The artisans who built this temple were Etruscan. The terracotta statues on top? Made by Vulca of Veii, the most famous Etruscan sculptor of the time. The decorated tiles? Etruscan production. The architecture itself? Pure Etruscan model. Rome's most sacred temple, the center of its state religion, was built by Etruscans, decorated by Etruscans, following Etruscan design. And Rome never changed that. Even after supposedly expelling the Etruscan kings, Rome kept this temple as its supreme religious symbol. But let's get to the official narrative of the expulsion. In 509 BC, according to Livy, Tarquinius Superbus's son, Sextus Tarquinius, raped Lucretia, a Roman noblewoman. She told her husband and father, then committed suicide. Her relative Lucius Junius Brutus led a revolt. Tarquinius Superbus was expelled. The Republic was established. A nice story, but here's the problem. Archaeology shows no evidence of violent rupture in 509 BC. No destruction layer in Rome's excavations from that time. No evidence of civil war or military conflict. Etruscan structures continued functioning normally. Construction projects continued. Trade with Etruscan cities continued uninterrupted. And here's the strangest part. Tarquinius Superbus didn't die. According to sources, he fled to the Etruscan city of Caere, modern Cerveteri, then to Tusculum, then tried to reclaim Rome with help from other Etruscan cities. For almost 20 years, he tried to retake Rome, and during all that time, major Etruscan cities supported his attempts. Veii, Tarquinia, Clusium, all intervened on his behalf. Why? If Tarquin was just a despised tyrant, why would so many Etruscan cities try to restore him? The official answer: ethnic solidarity. But that doesn't explain the scale or persistence of support. Unless Rome didn't expel a foreign tyrant, unless there was an internal coup, a Roman faction breaking away from a larger Etruscan power network, and other Etruscan cities trying to re-establish control over a rebel colony. And after the restoration attempts failed, something very strange happened. Rome spent the next 100 years fighting systematic wars against each of the 12 Etruscan cities, one by one. Veii in 396 BC, Tarquinia in 351 BC, Caere in 273 BC. These weren't opportunistic conquests. It was methodical elimination, as if Rome was destroying evidence, erasing witnesses. Now let's consider what happened after the supposed expulsion of the Etruscan kings, because this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Rome kept everything the Etruscans built. The Cloaca Maxima, still in use. The Circus Maximus, expanded and used for centuries. The Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus became the center of Roman state religion. The Servian walls defended Rome for 400 years. The Centuriate Constitution, foundation of Roman politics. The organization of the legions, maintained exactly as Tarquin established. Rome kept all of Etruscan religion, the augurs who read omens through bird flight, Etruscan practice, the haruspices who divined through animal livers, Etruscan priests, city foundation rituals, Etruscan, the very idea that gods communicate their will through signs, Etruscan theology. The Roman Republic maintained a college of Etruscan haruspices for 600 years. 600 years. They weren't occasional consultants. They were a permanent part of Roman government, consulted before every major military and political decision. Rome kept the Etruscan political model. The Senate, established by Tarquinius Priscus, the consuls, 2 annual leaders, exactly like Etruscan Zilath. The division into patricians and plebeians, mirror of Etruscan class division. The very word person comes from Etruscan fursu. So, what exactly did Rome expel? They expelled the kings, but kept all physical infrastructure, all religious system, all political structure and all cultural practices, all technical specialists, all sacred rituals. That's not how revolutions work. When you overthrow foreign tyrants, you don't carefully preserve their legacy. Unless they weren't foreign tyrants. Unless they were your own founders. And here's the most disturbing evidence. Rome began systematically erasing Etruscan records. The Etruscan books. Livy mentions that the Etruscans had extensive libraries, religious, historical, ritual, prophetic texts. He calls these texts Etrusca Disciplina, the Etruscan discipline. These books were consulted by Romans for centuries. And then, during the imperial period, they all disappeared, every single one. The libraries were lost, burned, or simply never mentioned again. Today, we have 3 long texts in Etruscan. 3. From a civilization that lasted 800 years and dominated all of Italy. Compare with Greek texts. Tens of thousands survived. Works meticulously copied and preserved through the centuries. But Etruscan texts, erased so completely that the language became indecipherable. Roman origins. Remember what I said at the beginning. Rome spent 500 years fighting against Etruscan cities. And as each city fell, its population was massacred, enslaved, or dispersed. Physical structures were often left standing. They couldn't destroy architectural evidence, but written records, destroyed. Oral traditions, silenced. Genealogies, erased. And when Rome finally controlled all of ancient Etruria, it began rewriting its own foundation history. Emphasis on Romulus and Remus. Emphasis on the 7 kings, including the 3 Etruscans, but framed as invaders. Emphasis on the glorious republic that overthrew tyranny. But here's what they can't completely erase. DNA. Modern genetic studies of Roman remains from the 6th-5th centuries BC, exactly the period of the Etruscan kings, show significant genetic continuity with Etruscan populations. There's no evidence of population replacement, no wave of true Romans replacing Etruscan occupiers. Rome's population during the Etruscan monarchy and Rome's population in the early Republic were genetically continuous, which means there was no mass expulsion, no liberation from foreign occupation. There was a regime change, a political rebranding, a fabricated origin story. So what really happened in 509 BC? I can't prove it definitively. The sources are fragmentary, biased, written centuries after the events. But I can show you the pattern, and the pattern suggests something very different from the official narrative. Rome wasn't an independent village that was conquered by tyrannical Etruscan kings and then heroically freed itself. Rome was part of the Etruscan power network from the beginning, one of many cities under Etruscan influence or direct control. The three Etruscan kings didn't invade. They ruled a city that was already integrated into the Etruscan political and cultural system. They built infrastructure, established institutions, implemented religion not as occupiers, but as administrators of a city within a larger sphere of influence. And then something changed. Maybe a Roman aristocratic faction decided to seek independence. Maybe there was internal conflict between different Etruscan cities over control of Rome. Maybe economic or military factors made maintaining direct control impractical. But whatever the reason, Rome broke away, and then spent the next centuries systematically destroying Etruscan cities, not in opportunistic conquest, but in methodical elimination of evidence. Because if the world knew that Rome was founded by Etruscans, built by Etruscans, ruled by Etruscans, and functioned through Etruscan institutions, the great narrative of Roman exceptionalism would crumble. Rome didn't build a civilization from scratch. Rome inherited an already existing civilization and then erased its true creators from history. The evidence is there. The Cloaca Maxima still drains Rome after 2,600 years. The Temple of Jupiter was built by Etruscan artisans. The Senate's organization was established by Tarquinius Priscus. The political constitution was created by Servius Tullius Macstrna. The state religion was Etruscan in all fundamental aspects. But the names were changed, the origins were obscured, the sources were suppressed, and the official narrative transformed founders into invaders, creators into tyrants, and a century of Etruscan development into a brief period of foreign occupation. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. 3 Etruscan kings, 100 years of transformation, and then an expulsion story that conveniently justifies keeping everything they created while denying who actually built Rome. The question isn't whether Rome was influenced by the Etruscans. Ancient sources admit that. The question is, to what extent was Rome Etruscan? And what needed to be erased to create the illusion of Roman originality? In the next video, we'll investigate the 12 cities of the Etruscan League and why Rome destroyed them one by one. Because the story of the 3 kings is just the beginning. The real conspiracy is much bigger, and the evidence is buried beneath Rome to this day.